However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Mystic Lounge. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host. I have a really special episode today, and I'm excited to share this with you because many of you know that personally I've dealt with addiction, depression, anxiety in the past, and I've come a long way. And that's a topic that I think is really important to bring to the overall wellness, metaphysical spirituality discussion. I am agnostic and a part-time atheist, so while we do cover some of those more metaphysical and speculative conversations regarding how we live our lives and the nature of reality, we can't ignore the very grounded psychological work that is integral to our well-being, to our growth and evolution. So I'm excited to have our guest on today, Dr. Abbie Moronio. We'll talk to her in just a moment. As a friendly reminder, Mystic Lounge is rebroadcast on the Onyx Network every Thursday, 11 p.m. Pacific, and Friday Eastern, 2 a.m. If you like this podcast and the Coffee and UFOs podcast on this channel, please subscribe, comment down below, like, share your thoughts. All that is really appreciated, and it helps the channel grow, and we are growing. So thank you for that. Okay, and now to bring on our esteemed guest, Dr. Abbie Moronio. Dr. Abbie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. Let me briefly read your bio as a general introduction so people understand what makes you unique. And speaking of unique, bringing a unique level of experience and scientific validation to her work, Dr. Abbie Moronio is both a scientist and a practitioner in the field of human behavior. The United States Department of State has recognized her international acclaim and record of extraordinary achievements, placing her in the top 1% of her field. Underscoring her recognized expertise, Dr. Abbie has been invited to provide specialized behavior analysis training for elite units such as the Internet Crimes Against Children ICAC Task Force. The prestigious group includes agents from the U.S. Secret Service, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and local law enforcement agencies. Having completed her PhD in psychology, Dr. Abbie became a professor of psychology by the age of 23. She is now the Director of Education at Social Engineer LLC and specializes in behavior analysis. A regular contributor to Forbes and Apple News, Abbie has also been featured on BBC News, Wired, and Forbes Breaking News. She is an active member of several internationally recognized research groups and was awarded Reviewer of the Year in 2020 for her significant contribution to the academic community. Additionally, she is an author, expert, consultant, coach, and TEDx speaker. Her most recent work is called Work in Progress: The Road to Empowerment, the Journey Through Shame. And shame is a big one. So, Dr. Abbie, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I was so happy when I saw your TED Talk. Your talk really spoke to me on multiple levels. So could you just give us a little bit of an introduction to your book, Work in Progress, and what it means?
Well, the book was designed to give people a tool to get themselves through any difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to write a book that was like, do A, B, C, D to get yourself out. What I wanted to do was give people a way they could understand their own emotions, so they could take that understanding and apply it to anything they go through in life. So I really wanted to give people emotional resilience. Mm-hmm. And a huge part of that is understanding how to self-reflect, understanding what emotions mean, because you can't remedy an emotion unless you understand it and then understand how it feels. And the main thing I really wanted to get across with the book was, when I was going through my own healing journeys and looking for books to help me, although those books were very well-meaning, mm-hmm. they taught concepts that sounded great, right, but they didn't really coincide with the way that human beings function. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to get across the science. I wanted to get across the hard neuroscience, the real meat that is going to help people, but in a way that they could digest it. So I wanted to make the book very scientific, but without feeling scientific.
Yeah. So kind of
So
avoiding like platitudes and that sort of
yes.
thing. Right.
Yeah, and I didn't want to give a book that was so light and felt good to read in the way
Hmm.
that you put it down and you're like, oh, that feels so wonderful. And that's what a lot of these mindfulness books do. You put it down and you feel motivated and feel great.
Hmm.
And as nice as that feeling is, that isn't actually healing. I wanted to give people something that worked.
Mm.
And part of that is saying this book isn't going to be fun to read the whole way through because I'm going to ask a lot of you. I'm going to give you hard things to do. I'm going to say, sit and think about these things and reflect on these things.
Hmm.
And if you can do that and it isn't tough, then you're not growing. So I wanted that reality of this is going to be a difficult book to read, but it's going to be an important book to read.
Yeah. So I guess that brings about expectations,
Yeah.
right? So when someone is looking at themselves and going, okay, I need to change, or I need to work through this therapeutically, um, they go into it, I think, and I've done this, like you said, I picked up a book on spirituality or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but then I
Yeah.
don't know how to execute the actual change.
Yeah. And you see the representations of what it means to be growing and healed. And a lot of those expectations are things like being bulletproof. You see
Hmm.
people saying, I don't care what other people think of me. I'm empowered. I'm healing. Their opinions don't matter to me at all. I don't care if people like me or not. I'm just doing me. And
Hmm.
as nice as that sounds, that doesn't follow the scientific literature of how people actually work. This idea of stopping caring what people think about you and being bulletproof is an unrealistic and impossible expectation. And when people say, I don't care what other people think about me, what
Hmm.
they mean is I'm denying my true emotional experience. Because the way the human brain works is our centers of the brain that process physical pain process social pain because we do care what people think about us. When we lose social relationships and we feel social rejections, it's processed in the brain like pain, like physical pain. It hurts to be socially rejected. That's why after a breakup, you can seriously get issues with your heart. It can be heartbreaking. It feels, that feeling in the gut, that gut feeling. And if we say, well, my goal is to be bulletproof and to heal in this way and to stop caring,
Yeah.
it's impossible. What we need to do is understand, okay, well, how do I mitigate the effects of my caring about what other people feel? How do I decide what to pay attention to and what not to? How do I regulate that emotion? Because when we think about healing, what we tend to see is how do we control our emotions and how do we stop that emotion coming in? And again, that isn't how the brain works. We're going to be, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
And we're going to be constantly triggered by things that we don't realize that we're triggered by
Hmm.
because there's going to be unconscious triggers everywhere. It's impossible to control those emotions coming in completely. What we
Right.
can do is control our reaction. We can mitigate the intensity. We can understand how they feel in the body, how to react to them, and we can stop taking our emotions so personally, meaning we feel an emotion and we think it says something about us as a person. So I feel shame. And instead of thinking, well, I did something shameful, we think, oh, well, I'm a failure. When I feel angry, instead of thinking, well, something made me angry, this is an evolved response, we go, well, I'm an angry person. We feel
Yeah.
weak. So it's about understanding the realities and taking a scientific approach in that sense rather than having these extreme unrealistic expectations.
Right. So let's back up to this idea of caring about what other people think or not, because you can go too far, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
could care too much about what
yeah,
other people think, people pleasing
yes,
behaviors.
that's a common one.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you know where on the spectrum is the healthy place is?
Well, it's a really difficult balance to find because, again, we need to be able to say, well, your opinions of me don't change how I see myself. But we also need to recognize that sometimes maybe it should. Because if you don't care what other people think about what you're going to do as you go through life. You might have negative effects on other people and social groups. And if you don't care, then is that the kind of person you want to be? Someone that makes other people feel this way? And say lots of people are saying, well, they act this way, or they make me feel negative in this sense. And if you don't care about that, you're going to continue to have that effect on other people. Real, genuine leaders care how they make other people feel. If you're a good friend, you should care how you make other people feel. And if you're going about life and you're not looking for feedback, how are you ever going to improve? Because we get so focused on habits and we keep moving forward in one way that's comfortable to us. And if we don't listen to other people's opinions on that, we might not recognize, actually, I could be better, I could grow. But then, as you said, we have people pleasing where we focus too much. And someone says, oh, well, I don't like that you did this. And then we go, okay, well, I won't do this again. Or, I prefer people that have this opinion or this view. So you change your view. So the way that we can kind of get around this and find that happy middle ground is, again, I talked about giving people that emotional resilience. And that's why it's key, because we need to be able to differentiate between who is really having positive intentions, so who is giving us this feedback because they want to help us, and who wants to hinder us. And one thing we can do is understand how it feels inside. So if someone gives us a criticism, do we self-direct it or behavior direct it? So if someone says, I don't like that you did this, or gives us a criticism about the way we communicate, a healthy way to approach it is by behavioring, is by focusing on the behavior. So they criticize me. This is about my behavior. I can change it. If we instead focus on, okay, well, they criticize my behavior, therefore it says something about who I am as a person. Therefore, I'm not enough because I did this, or I'm a failure because I did this wrong. Yeah. That's where it starts to become people pleasing, because instead of thinking about, okay, well, how do I change this action? We go, how do I change myself? And that can be really dangerous.
It's so the behavior is critiqued, and then the person says there's something wrong with me.
Yes, we tend, and I said before, we tend to take our emotions too personally, and it's the same with our behavior.
That's kind of almost an oxymoron, but I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why people are like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, your behavior says something about your reactions and about the way you behave, and your emotions are guiding your behavior, but they don't necessarily say who you are as a person.
Right.
Because we don't take everything into account. So maybe I act in a way that I'm ashamed of. If I then say, well, because I acted this way, say I did a bad thing, I go, well, I'm a bad person. Instead of, I just did a bad thing and I have the ability to change.
But then what about the rest of the world? I mean, because we're not supposed to care too much, but care just enough.
Yeah.
But if you do a behavior, right, then, and people go, they judge you, especially in modern, in today's age. It's like instant. In the past, you can make a mistake. The immediate people around you might know it, but that kind of gives you a chance to kind of navigate that, have a conversation. Yes. But today, if you do something, someone can post something about your behavior on Facebook or on social media, and now there's this like collective shaming.
Yeah.
So that just seems to make it all the more challenging.
It is. It's so challenging, because how do we know who we are if we're constantly bombarded with who we should be?
Right.
And emotional resilience is really grounded in that self-awareness, because if I do something and people are criticizing it, and I reflect on, how do I feel about that? What are my emotions telling me? And if I do feel shame, then that might be the case of, okay, well, actually, this doesn't represent the person that I want to be. If we feel embarrassment, well, embarrassment is a social emotion and we all experience that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't represent who you are. So if I do something, but it is grounded in my moral or spiritual or religious beliefs, whatever, say I'm not a religious person, but say you do something and it creates embarrassment, but it is in line with your religious beliefs, it's unlikely to induce shame, because it's in line with who you believe yourself to be. You might experience guilt, you might experience embarrassment, but it's that shame feeling that says, okay, well, maybe I need to consider, is this something that I want to continue to do in the future? The problem now, as you said, with social media is we're told this is how you should be. And this is, this is what success is. And if you don't do this, then you're not successful. And this is how you should interact. And if we don't do that, people are so quick to criticize. But then there's multiple different messages. If you don't do this, if you do this, if you do this, how are we ever going to know the right way? And that's where that self-understanding is. That's why that understanding what our emotions are telling us and how we feel, but being able to regulate it. So I use the phrase, don't aim to be bulletproof, aim to be bouncy. Because to say that I'm never going to be affected by this inundation of you should do this and you should be like this and you should feel like this and you shouldn't feel like this, you should be stoic, you should be vulnerable, you should be all these conflicting things. If I say I'm never going to be a little bit confused or affected, I'm going to be bulletproof, then I'm just lying to myself. The real goal is to be bouncy. I let those emotions get to me because I'm human, but I'm resilient enough to get up because I know that what I'm doing and how I'm behaving is in line with the person that I want to be and is in line with my moral and ethical beliefs.
You mentioned being stoic, but what you're saying actually sounds kind of like stoicism.
It's a little bit of stoicism, but stoicism is about not being affected by emotions at all.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that is unrealistic, but we can definitely take a lot of great lessons from stoicism because we tend to focus too much on our emotions. What we have to remember is our emotions are like waves. They come and they go up and down. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to kind of separate ourselves from them instead of letting them completely consume us. We feel it, and in that moment, we try and take a step back and observe it. So instead of just sinking into that feeling of how I feel, take a step back and think, okay, well, why do I feel?
Right. Charles in the comment section asks, is there something like healthy shame versus toxic shame?
That is such a great question. I'm so glad you asked. So we tend to have a perception in society that all shame is bad. And a lot of therapists will talk about trying to get rid of shame. And you see in media, people don't really want to talk about shame. All shame is bad. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I said that the road to empowerment is the journey through shame is I believe that shame and empowerment are synonymous. You can't have one without the other. Mm-hmm. And the difference is this toxic versus healthy shame. Toxic shame is that thinking that the feeling says something about us, in that way of, okay, well, I feel it, I feel shame, and therefore I am shameful. So I did a bad thing, I am bad. I direct it directly to my core self. Mm-hmm. Because I feel shame, therefore I'm not just shameful, I'm bad, and then that quickly turns into, well, I'm worthless, well, I'm unlovable. Mm-hmm. And if you think those things, why would you even bother changing? Because the problem isn't my behavior. It's something that can be changed. The problem is who I am at my core. So I might as well just continue down this path because there's no retribution for someone who's bad at their core. And that's where unhealthy shame is. That's that toxic shame. Healthy shame is recognizing that, okay, well, I feel like a failure. Mm-hmm. And maybe I feel unlovable. But what it's actually doing is it's signaling that, okay, I'm behaving in a way that is not cohesive with who I perceive myself to be or who I want to be. So it's recognizing that this feeling is normal, but it can be changed. Because again, if we think about what shame means, mm-hmm. shame is that I have this idea of who I am. I have an idea of who I want to be and how I see myself. If I behave in a way that is inconsistent with that, that's where shame starts to be felt. Yeah. And it's an evolved mechanism. And think about, well, why would we feel this? Because evolution doesn't do things by accident. It does it for a reason. And emotions are signals. So what could shame be signaling? Well, if I'm doing something that isn't in line with who I want to be or who I am, it's saying you need to change. Feeling shame is a signal that something needs to change. And that's why I say it's synonymous with empowerment. Because if I'm doing things, say I'm doing them out of trauma responses, or I'm drinking, and for me, I was taking some pretty serious drugs and drinking a lot. because I was trying to avoid feeling my depression.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of sitting with that feeling and trying to work through it, I avoided it. And
Yeah.
those behaviors started to really conduce to this overwhelming shame that I felt. And I just kept avoiding that. If I had sat with that feeling and said, what are you trying to tell me?
Right.
It would say, I'm telling you need to stop doing these things. And then I need to dig deeper of, okay, let me sit with the emotions. Let me figure out why. So when we do listen to our shame, it allows us to grow and change. And my shame, although it was overwhelming and I did things that I'm never going to be proud of,
Mm-hmm.
now they've moved into embarrassment. And I'm still embarrassed about them because, of course, I wish I didn't do those things.
Sure.
But I don't feel shame for them anymore because I looked shame in the eyes and I said, okay, what are you trying to tell me?
But what about if you do something and you hurt someone? I know that in my younger years,
Yes.
I definitely hurt people. And in the recovery process, you want to, quote unquote, make an
Yeah.
amends, which isn't asking for forgiveness. It's just trying to reach that person again and say, I know what I did was wrong. I'm sorry, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can't now. I mean, I can't find a couple of those people, and they're kind of like these
Yes.
ghosts in my head.
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that? Because it's like, I know that I've become a better person, or I've released that behavior, but I don't know where they are in their head with what I've done. Do you know?
Yeah, that is another great question. And this is where a lot of people get confused with shame and guilt because they're so interconnected. Guilt is that I have done something and other people were harmed, or I wish I hadn't, and I feel guilty for doing that thing. That is different than shame because, say, I break up with someone, I might feel guilt, but if I know that it was for the best reason and it was for my well-being, I don't feel shame for it. Say maybe I cheated on someone, then I might feel shame because that contradicts, who I want to be. So those emotions are different, but they're interconnected. And when you're engaging in behaviors that cause shame, you might work through that shame, but you'll still feel that guilt.
Yeah.
Because in that journey, other people were hurt, and that's a really hard thing to work through. And I did a little bit of work with rehabilitation centers. And one thing that really stuck out to me was this a quote that a guy had said to me. He was talking about his healing journey. And he had said that he had done so many bad things and hurt so many people that the only option he had was to keep doing them. And it was because if you stop doing them and you decide, okay, I'm going to heal, I'm going to work through that shame, you now have to come face to face with the reality of what you have done, because you're no longer escaping it. If you want to heal, you have to go through it. And part of that means not just facing the shame, facing the disappointment, because you might feel disappointed for this kind of person I could be, this life I could have had, and I'm disappointed I let myself down. You might feel resentment towards yourself or others. Other people that went through things that you went through, and maybe they had more support than you had. And that resentment might make you feel less than, which then makes you feel more shame. So there's all these other negative emotions interconnected with that shame that you've got to work through if you decide to grow and change as a person, which is one of the reasons we don't do it, because other negative emotions can stop us from working through that shame. Because, like I said, if you say, okay, well, I'm going to grow, but this means I have to come face to face with these relationships, and maybe these people don't want to see me again because maybe I'll change, but I have to come to that reality of, well, even though I'm different, I still hurt them, and their reality of me is still this person I used to be. And part of growing is realizing that it's not our place to take that experience away from people. Although we can change, we can't undo what has been done.
You can't undo, but how do you like let go of that? Just like free your mind and.
Gosh,
Can you?
that is a hard question.
Yeah.
It really is that emotional resilience, because we hold on to so many emotions, and what we do, especially things like anger, we don't know where to put it, because if we don't have good emotional regulation strategies, these emotions, they're just there and we can't put them anywhere. That's why we tend to suppress them. Go away. I don't know how to regulate you, so go away. Or escape them. Okay, well, I can't regulate you, so I'm going to run away from you.
Mhm.
And part of that is self-reflecting and growing and changing and sitting with them, and letting it go is something that happens over time. You can't sit down and let it go. I'm not going to have everything. And
Sure.
like, if I want to go to the gym and grow muscles, I can't have a 6-hour session.
And
I've got to
yeah.
have, half hour to an hour over years and
Mhm.
years. It's the same with these emotions. So incorporating daily mindfulness strategies of when you feel that emotion, what we might do is we might say, I feel anger. I might direct it towards the world. A bad thing happened and I'm angry at the world, or a bad thing happened, I'm angry at myself. It's my fault.
Mhm.
What we need to try and do is stop world directing it, stop self-directing it, and see it for what it is. Something that happened and it cannot be changed.
Yeah.
So those daily steps of journaling is a really easy first step.
Mm.
And the reason journaling is so powerful, especially before bed and in the morning, is you have all of these emotions, and imagine they're just bouncing around all over the place, and it's all these words.
Right.
And how could you go to sleep and rest your mind if they're bouncing around all over the place? It's going to be way too active. So you want to try and get them down on paper. You want to try and get them out so your mind is a little bit free. And as you do that, as you make something that's intangible, because all these thoughts in our head, they're completely intangible. Sometimes we don't know what we feel, how we feel, why we feel.
Right. Yeah.
When you try and make it tangible, and I don't mean like as you're writing, really focusing really hard on trying to understand it. No. Just write down. Just write down how you feel. Let it just be a complete stream of consciousness. Because what you'll find is it's so therapeutic just to let it out. And as you're doing that, you might have realizations of, oh, that's why I feel it. And there's so much research that even just writing with your hand, you don't even have to put it on paper. It has the same psychological effect, whether you do it on your phone notes, whether you do it on a Word document, whether you write it on pen and paper, or if you literally think the thoughts out loud and write them with your hand. It's just that act of making those thoughts tangible that is really therapeutic. And when you do that over time, and that there's so many more, but say you just do that, do it at night or do it in the morning, that has a really, really big effect on psychological well-being.
Is there like an immediate, when you do that actual action, is there like an immediate neurological response that's measurable?
Yes. Yeah, there can be a real calming effect, because if you think about anger, say you're angry or you feel overwhelming shame, your nervous system is releasing a lot of cortisol. So you're releasing sometimes adrenaline and cortisol. And as you verbalize that and as you get it out, you see reductions in cortisol. And it's the same with self-talk. So if I say to myself, I can't do this, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I release cortisol. And cortisol blocks critical thinking. It reduces performance. It can also create muscle tightness and muscle tension. So say I'm doing something active and I say, I'm not going to be very good at this, I can't do this. Well, I'm going to be worse because of muscle tightness. When I change up the way that I talk to myself, and I actually talk to myself with positive intentions, and I say, you know what, I am good enough. I can do this. I deserve happiness. And I say all these positive things. Cortisol is reduced, and we start to activate reward pathways. So when we do this over time, we train reward pathways, meaning it feels more rewarding, and we release natural dopamine. So affirmations in the morning might sound like a really silly thing to do, but doing them regularly in the morning, you increase serotonin and you increase dopamine. So what are you going to do less? Well, you're going to seek out less dopamine from other sources. So if I say, I deserve this, I can do this, I've got this, that's my natural source of dopamine. And what I might do is say, you know what? I deserve positive food. I deserve healthy food. I deserve these positive things, and I create the cycle.
Right.
If I don't do that, I'm going to seek out another form of dopamine. So I might scroll. I might post on Instagram and see if I get enough likes that I feel really good about myself.
Yeah.
I might seek it out in those other ways. And again, it becomes a cycle. So it's all about really small but consistent behaviors.
We have a comment here or a question by Sue Ritter. So won't journaling serve as a reminder of unpleasant stuff we have experience gone through. Doesn't writing, journaling solidify unpleasant experiences? And I can say in recovery, that's one of the like conversations that does come up, especially in early recovery, because
Yeah.
people think you go into a room with a bunch of other people and you're just talking about all these terrible
Yeah.
things. How can that possibly be good? And
Well,
ironically, it's cathartic. It's
yes.
yeah. Go ahead.
It is cathartic. And although you might think, well, wouldn't continuously talking about these negative things
Hmm.
create more negativity? And if you focus on them and your mindset is, I'm never going to change from them, then absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why journaling isn't the only thing to do. Because if you write down all these negative things and your mindset is a limiting mindset of, I'm never going to grow from them, then of course you're not going to change.
Yeah.
You'll get the emotions out, but what you're going to do is you're going to continue to put them back in. So you're going to end up in that cycle. So what you want to do is you want to journal, and as you go through it, that's why I say take a step back.
Yeah.
So when you feel that emotion and you're writing it down with that recognition of, I am not my emotions.
Right. Okay.
So that's
So
why,
keep that at the front of your mind
yes.
as you're doing it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and as you're feeling those negative things, reminding yourself, well, my emotions are fleeting.
Yeah.
And one story that I always tell to kind of explain this is I went through a really, really dark period of my life a few years ago. And because I had an understanding of the science of emotions,
Hmm.
I was able to be active in my own healing. I wasn't just a participant in my healing, I was directing it. And I said, instead of fake it till you make it, in terms of pretend you don't feel that way, I said,
Hmm.
well, feel the emotion, fake the behavior. Because I know my emotions don't
Right.
mean anything about who I am as a person, but they do mean things about what I've gone through in my situation. So I feel them. I gave them time. I would wake up in the morning and I would cry every morning, but I would wake up at 6 a.m. and I would say, okay, I feel like I want to stay in bed, but I'm going to fake the behavior. I'm going to get up anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I would do is I would, while I'm working out, I would feel angry and I would feel it, but I would say to myself, I feel this way.
Right.
And it feels like I'm never going to be different. It feels like I'm alone. It feels like this is never ending, but it's just a feeling. It isn't reality. And I'd go from the gym to my office and I'd cry on the bus and I'd cry on my way home.
Mm.
And it went on for months and months. And I'd be on the phone to my dad. And every day I would cry on the phone to him and he's like, it's going to get better. And I said, I
Mhm.
know it will.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel it, but I know that it will. And eventually over time, because I was engaging in those behaviors that I didn't want to, but
Right.
I knew would increase my natural serotonin, would increase my natural dopamine, would increase my endorphins. And I tried to limit those things that I knew I wanted to do, but neurologically would keep me in that negative cycle.
Yeah.
My healing journey really went through quite rapidly at the end, because then when I look back, I was like, you know what? Instead of being stuck in this negative cycle, I've built a life that I'm really proud of. And then all those little things are conducive to increased happiness, increased purpose, increased well-being, increased sense of achievement. And all of those things then work together to
Yeah.
build up a better mental health and better general well-being. So it takes time, but
Mhm.
that's why it's not just about journaling and it's not just about mindfulness and it's not just about going to the gym. It's all of those things collectively, but it's
Yes.
over time, because you've got to find that balance between, okay, well, when do I really need a rest? And when am I just being lazy? You know, it's consistent small changes over time that lead to those changes. You're not going to heal overnight.
Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to recognize those bigger emotions,
Yeah.
traumatic events and triggers. But what about, when you're kind of just slowly conditioned from childhood and, people who are raised and they're told, no, you can't do that, or you're not good enough at that.
Mm.
This is what you should do. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. And then they go into adulthood, and it's not like these big waves of emotions. It's just this
Yeah.
constant, this underlying negative, trauma that's just like
Yeah.
on the subconscious level. How do you recognize, how do you get through that? Because that seems more almost insidious.
Yeah, well, most of us are always carrying things from our childhood. That's just the way that it is, because
Yeah.
the brain is continuously developing, but we go through critical growth periods early in our life. So very early in our life, our brain is trying to understand, okay, well, what should I expect from the world? So when you're spoken to negatively by a parent, or you experience abuse or experience trauma, your brain will develop in a way that it goes, okay, well, this is what I should expect. And neurons that fire together wire together. If you witness abusive relationships, you might go, okay, well, love is violence. And that's what I learned very early on, because I keep seeing these things. So you go on later in life and do these things, and because they're so familiar to you, you might talk to yourself really negatively. I used to say that I would have my mum's voice in my head because nothing was ever good enough. And anytime I would do something, I couldn't rest. I've always been a workaholic, and it's a trait that's praised. But it's like you said, those trauma responses. For me, when I would sit down and take a rest, all I would hear in my head is, you're a failure. You're weak. You're not good enough. So I'd get up and work. And any achievement I ever made, it's not enough. You're still not good enough. So I kept pushing. It's really hard to recognize those things in yourself because they're familiar. Unless something makes you aware of it, it's really difficult to recognize that that's not normal. And when I teach emotional regulation and teach well-being, a lot of the time I get people go, that's not normal. Like, that's a trauma response. And I go, yeah. And they go, oh my gosh. And that's why a couple of things are really important. General education in emotions. It's so essential. And that's why it's a huge passion of mine to teach general well-being, because if we don't understand them, we can't remedy them. And part of that is realizing what is normal and what isn't, and what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And I tend to prefer healthy versus unhealthy than normal, because what really is normal? There is no normal per se, but I equate normal to healthy. And that's just a better way to think about it. What is going to benefit your well-being?
Yeah.
And
I
then,
mean, well, I was going to say normal is conditional. It depends on the
exactly. Yeah.
society, the
So what
environment
might
that
be
you're living in.
normal might
Right.
be unhealthy. So a
Yes.
better way to think about it is what's healthy. And we don't often recognize that what we've been through too is unhealthy. So I had no idea how traumatic my childhood was until speaking to other people about their childhoods. And then when I would say stories about mine, they would be horrified.
Yeah.
And then I took the traumatic childhood inventory, and I came out with an extremely traumatic result. And then I realized, oh gosh, these things were abuse. And then I had to start working through them. And I had my sister do the same. And there was a lot of unexpected things that came up because we just didn't know, because it was so familiar. And then the other way is not just education, but it's surrounding yourself with really good, trusted people.
Yeah.
Because if you surround yourself with kind, trusted, genuine people that care about you, when they see those things in you, they will tell you.
Right.
And those two things, that general education you seek out for yourself, and asking other people and having good people around you, they are just so invaluable. Those two aspects.
Do you think that's one of the problems with marriages and relationships, that we kind of go into them with these starry-eyed expectations that we found our one true love, and then we're good, right? Like,
Yeah.
and in reality, what you want is someone who will actually, call something out and recognize, where you're struggling and that sort of thing. And I think that if we go in starry-eyed, then all of a sudden we're offended if somebody is like, I don't like what you're doing right now. Do you see what you're doing?
Yep. And
Yeah.
what we tend to do is, when we go in starry-eyed and go, oh, this person's perfect, they're going to complete my life, what we're doing is we're entering in a relationship with insecurity. So we're saying there's something lacking in myself, and I need this person to complete it.
Yeah.
And that is never going to be healthy, because what happens is we get so focused on, do they want me? And we don't ask ourselves, well, do I want them? because
Right.
I'm happy without them. You can say, well, I might want them, but I'm happy without them. And when we go in with that mindset of I'm starry-eyed, this person is going to complete me,
Mm-hmm.
when they say, oh, I like these things or I don't like these things, what we might do is we try and prove, well, I am those things. Keep me. And you think about all the ways that you can keep this person because you don't want them to leave you.
Right.
And a lot of that comes from abandonment. So when we focus on, please don't leave me, how do I keep you?
Yeah.
What we might do is we adapt ourselves to fit what they want. And it can be from the most loving, well-meaning place, but it's actually very manipulative. Because not only is it unfair to you because you don't get to feel authentically you, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't get to see the authentic version of the person they're with. So you're never going to be able to keep that up, and you're never going to be truly satisfied
Yeah.
because you are changing who you are. And that's going to lead to relationship problems much later down the line. Or you might just stay in an unhappy relationship and resent that other person,
Right.
which again isn't fair on you. But it's so common of I want them to want me
Mm-hmm.
instead of do I want them? And that healthy mindset is we don't have to be perfectly aligned. No two people are perfectly aligned. And, you know, the name of my book is Work in Progress. Who you are now is not going to be who you are in a year's time, might not even be who you are tomorrow.
Yeah.
We are ever changing because of situations, experiences, education. I might
Mm-hmm.
have a really strong political view, so I try and maintain my behavior in line with that. And then I might educate myself and realize, actually, I don't like these things. So I might change them and change my behavior.
Right.
So we're always growing and changing. So that person you're with isn't always going to be that version. And you're
Right.
not always going to be that version. And the reality is recognizing, well, a strong relationship is a choice. It's all a choice.
Yeah,
Because
sometimes a daily choice.
exactly a
Yeah.
daily choice of I'm not always going to be attracted to this person because attraction can come and go. I might not always feel all these positive emotions towards this person. And I might not always feel pleasure. I might not always feel these good things, but I choose to stay and I choose to commit. And when you do that, you make that choice of, okay, well, when we feel these negative things, you'd come together as a team and say, let's figure out what's going on. Because
Yeah.
if you go in with that starry-eyed, overwhelmed with how it feels, in those times when those feelings die and maybe
Mm-hmm.
that attraction dissipates, you might think, well, the love is gone. Love isn't a feeling, love is a choice, just
Interesting.
made up of feelings and behaviors.
I still think love can be a kind of a cosmic feeling.
Love
You
is,
know, like,
it's the collection of all of it.
yeah.
So you have passion, feeling, joy, feeling, lust, feeling.
Yeah.
But love is all of those things,
Mm.
but coupled with the reality that it's also a choice, that it's also things like self-discipline, self-control. Because are you ever going to be more attracted to someone else? Of course. Are you ever going to be in a situation where you have the choice that, okay, well, it's going to be easier to be with this person? Of course. Love is all of those feelings combined with that self-discipline of, no, I'm going to stay committed to that person.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to choose our future. No, I'm going to choose this person. Above
Mm-hmm.
all, it's a commitment. So it's so much more than just a feeling.
Yeah. And the idea of like to be completed by someone doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You complete me. No one's ever completed. Like, you know,
Yes, and that's such a
yeah.
good point because again, it comes with this understanding of the reality of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're taught a lot of the time you need to feel completely whole, and as a single person, you need to feel
Mm-hmm.
completely whole. And again, that isn't in line with how emotions actually work because
Right. Yeah.
surprisingly or unsurprisingly, it is so common. It is normal to feel a little bit empty. It is so normal to feel a little bit empty, like something is missing. And that's so
Interesting.
natural. If you're an ambitious person, you're going to feel like something is missing because you have all these goals you want to achieve.
Yeah.
It's going to feel like something is missing when you're in an unfamiliar situation, when you start a new job, when you have a little bit of imposter syndrome, which is also completely new. It is really normal. and we call it the human experience. It is the human experience to suffer. It is the human experience to feel negative emotions and to feel a little bit empty sometimes.
Yeah.
And if we're not educated on that reality, when we feel it, we go, well, I need a person to complete this. And then you're in that relationship and you still don't feel 100% full. So we go, well, this person isn't enough. But this relationship is failing. Oh, well, I'm not good enough because I don't feel 100% full. And it creates this self-destructive tendency.
Yeah.
Because you're living a normal human experience, but because it doesn't look like what it does on Instagram, or it doesn't look like how I'm told it should, or how this Disney movie said that it should. This person hasn't made me feel like I'm indestructible, therefore,
Right.
well, I'm going to leave them. So we self-destruct. That's why that education is so important. Of life shouldn't be a Disney movie. That is just not the human experience. You can have moments where it feels like a Disney movie, and you might have moments where it feels like an absolute train wreck.
Do you know the movie Princess and the Frog, when it came out, like, I don't know, it was like 15 years ago, something like that. It was differentiating itself from the other Disney movies because the lead character, she was self-empowered. She was on her own mission. But then at the end, they just married her to the guy who gave her the money to do her business anyway. I was like, you just undercut the entire purpose of that movie at the end. And I think, and then finally you had something like Frozen, where it's like, there's always a place for the romance and like the fairy tale aspect. That's fine, but it's nice to see some change now. Like, you have Frozen characters who are like, I don't need a life partner per se.
Yeah. And
Or,
we get these, again, really unhealthy expectations of, well, if you're independent, you need to not want these things. So again, it's that unrealistic expectation. And what we get taught is, instead of independence, we get taught hyper independence. And the reality should be,
interesting. Yeah.
I want these things to say. And I lived in this space for a long time because I was very independent. But I grew into hyper independence of, I don't want another person. I don't want a relationship. I don't need another person. I don't need to have anyone in my life to feel fulfilled. And I went through that stage for a really long time. And again, that's not how the brain works, because we are social beings. It is human. It is natural. It is normal to seek belonging. It is one of the foundations of what it means to be human. So what we should say is, I don't need another person, but I want them. I don't need these things, but absolutely I want them. And when you go into a relationship with that mindset of, I don't need you to complete me, but I really want you in my life, that's where we should be.
So is there a place for validation? You work on a project, you're doing this or that. Do you not need any validation? Can you just be like, yeah, I'm damn proud of my work? And
no, validation is so important.
Okay.
When we're validated, it means, okay, this emotion that I feel, I should feel this way. Like, if you have just done a really good project and you present it to the team and they go, okay, next, you don't feel validated. That does not feel good. You're proud. You want people to praise your achievements.
Right.
Again, that's so human. Our emotions should be validated, and we should work to validate other people's emotions too. Like, if you see that someone cares about something and they feel good about it, or they want some validation, give them that. But the feeling of wanting versus needing is again that line of, I don't need you to validate me because I do feel good in myself, but I want your validation. We all want to be liked. We all want validation. And when you come to terms with that and stop denying that you want validation, if I have a big achievement at work, or if I'm on stage as a speaker, do I want everybody to stay silent once I'm finished? No, I want a round of applause. I want you off your seats clapping, because it's validating. That is so normal to want.
Yes. I was doing a speaking event recently, and it was I'm fairly new to that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, when you're speaking, right, and you don't the audience is just silent the entire time. How do you feel? Are you comfortable in that space where?
Well, that's where
Yeah,
again, emotion regulation comes in, because if
right.
I go, oh God, they're silent, that means I'm
Hmm.
terrible. And then I panic. Well,
Yeah,
that's an unhealthy response.
right.
What I would think is they're silent. Maybe they're just processing.
Yeah,
Maybe,
they're locked in, they're keyed in,
yeah.
or
And it's
yeah.
like sometimes after a really intense speech, once it finishes, there is a moment of silence. And it's not because everyone's like, oh God, that was terrible. And then they clap because, oh, I should clap. It's actually, they need a second just to process. They're a little overwhelmed in a good
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
And then you breathe and then you, wow, that was amazing. So again, taking those emotions too personally.
Hmm.
And a lot of that comes from a general understanding of body language. So if you look at someone and they're silent, but they're engulfed,
Hmm.
when I see that, I take that as, okay, well, I'm going to keep going. This is positive.
Yeah.
If I look at them and they're silent, but they're like that, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should change something up. This says, okay, I care what people think and they
Yep.
don't look engaged. So I need to change something I'm doing.
Right.
So that's where it's coupled in with general social skills.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to people in sales about this kind of thing, and especially people who are new to it. It's a
Yeah.
very uncomfortable thing to stand in a room of people who are just looking
It
at
is.
you as
Yeah.
you talk. But I agree with everything you just said. And going back, I also really resonated with what you were saying about, and I didn't understand this at all until many, many years later. Not knowing how to deal with depression, or not even
Mm.
knowing that you have depression, right? And then you start self-medicating.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't understand that that was happening. And for me, it was kind of like this slow transition where you don't know where you cross that line, and then all of a sudden now
Mhm.
you're addicted to these things. But then on the other side, my thought was, I'm depressed because I'm addicted. But in reality, it was the depression
Well,
first.
it can be both.
It could be both, sure. But how do you know? Like, I think that's the problem, is a lot of people cross over into addiction and they just don't even realize in the
Yeah.
first place to ask themselves, how am I feeling? How am I, is this feeling of anxiety or depression? What is it trying to teach me?
Yeah, that's why I say we need to have a growth mindset
Yeah.
of, I want to grow, I want to change. Because if we don't go and seek out that education, sometimes it doesn't come to us. So if
Yeah.
we're doing small things to induce these feelings and we just feel generally really low, it's the same if we generally feel just very tired, but we're so consistent with it, we don't realize that we do until we feel better.
Hmm.
So if you don't go and seek out education, if you're just on that kind of continuous scale, nothing big is happening, nothing, really low is happening, nothing huge, you're just consistently in that same phase.
Yeah.
If you don't seek it out, you might not have anything to say, hey, you need to do this. But often what we do is we feel negative. So we let it control our behavior, that, going
Hmm.
back to fake it till you make it. I feel like I don't want to get out of bed, so I don't.
Right.
So we go into this cycle because we know from years and years and years of research that behaviors like staying in bed past sunrise is bad for mental health, because going to bed at a good time is really important, because sun up, sun down
Yeah.
regulates our hormonal responses. Cortisol fluctuates with sun up, sun down. So
Okay.
you're going to be in balance if you sleep in late and go to bed late. So start with that. Have a good nighttime, morning routine. Those things are so important. Drinking water, having a healthy diet, because your diet affects your microbiome. Your
Hmm.
microbiome controls a lot of the neurotransmitters in your body, like your serotonin. 90% of that is produced in your gut and not your brain. So diet has a huge impact. And then things like being active, your endorphins, your general hormones, your serotonin, those little things. And if you have a lifestyle that is unhealthy, all of those unhealthy behaviors are conducive to depression and
Hmm.
anxiety. And then anxiety and depression make us feel in ways that we
Yeah.
want to do those unhealthy things.
Yeah.
So we get stuck in this cycle. And most depression isn't a biological abnormality at its core. It's usually a behavioral abnormality, issue of my lifestyle is conducive to depression and anxiety, therefore I feel it. But some people really do have really serious biological underpinnings. But how would you know that if you don't change the behavior? Because you're going to continue to stay in this cycle.
Sure.
So trying to break the cycle is the key way. A lot of people will go to take medication.
Yeah.
And as a culture now, we're so quick to prescribe. The problem with that is, though, medications don't work. And I say that with 100% certainty if they don't cure depression, because if they did, you could stop taking them and it would be gone. If medications
Good point.
cured the issue, you could take a round of it and it would be gone.
Yep.
That's not how antidepressants work.
And
it's
you
not
still have
how
to do
anxiety meds. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that antidepressants are kind of just help quell
They
immediate.
treat the symptoms, not the cause. Now, the reason that I do promote that sometimes is sometimes you are not in an emotional state where you can get yourself out of it. And you are in such a bad headspace that you need those symptoms to go away in order to get yourself to a better place. And sometimes you do need to numb your emotions. And I have no issue with saying, okay, I can't actually deal with this right now. Let me put it on a shelf. That is healthy. If you don't have the emotional strength at that point in your life, it is okay to say, I'm going to deal with this later. I don't need to overwhelm myself with everything right now. And sometimes medications can get you to a place where you can then get off of them. But once you get off of them, you now need to say, I need to keep working into this healthy cycle, because it doesn't make it go away and then you have no responsibility on your own mental health. Your behaviors are directly responsible for your mental health, just as your mental health are responsible for your emotions, which we tend to let control our behaviors, but we don't have to. It is a choice. It's a hard choice. That doesn't mean that it's easy and just go, you know what? I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to stop doing these things. Everything's going to be great. It's not quite that easy. It is a very difficult choice, but it is a choice.
Yeah, you know, it's a thing that really irritates me sometimes is I'll see people who, you know, do turn their life around for whatever reason. I don't know what the process is that they go through, but then they become one of those people who say, well, you just got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I did it, you know, and I'm like, you are not helping the situation, you know?
Well, a lot of that is because they want to sell something. So if you present yourself as the optimum, that's what people want. So I know that people want to get to this optimum level. So I'm going to try and sell myself as that. And that is the complete opposite that I wanted to do in my book. What people tend to do is they teach from a pedestal of, you do all these things, you're going to be like me. I'm healed and wonderful and nothing touches me. And, you know, all you need to do is get up and do these things. And they teach from this pedestal. And that actually isn't helpful. The way to teach is, I teach in one of the final chapters of my book, I talk about my dad's stroke. And I say, you know, I can't go into more detail because I'm not healed. This is a part of my life that when I think too hard about it, I burst into tears. I am not healed. That's okay, because I'm a work in progress too. And I don't have to teach from a perspective of I'm perfect and you can get to this point of where I am, which is what a lot of people do, especially on social media. You should be teaching from the reality of nobody is perfect, but I have something that can help you get to a better point. And again, the point you're going to get to, you're never going to reach that point of I'm perfect either. What you can get to a point of is I'm really happy. And that's the goal. It isn't perfection. It isn't untouchable. It isn't bulletproof. It's bouncy and it's happy. And it's these real realities of the human experience.
So you're saying, what was it? Don't be bulletproof, be bouncy?
Yeah, don't aim to be bulletproof, aim to be bouncy.
I'm going to put that in the comments because I really love that. Don't aim to be bulletproof, aim to be bouncy. Quote Dr. Moreno. Moreno. Okay. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, by the way?
Yeah,
Moronio?
it's
Okay.
the English version is Morono, but Moronio is the Spanish one, and people don't usually get Moronio right. That's why
Okay.
I branded Dr. Abbie, because I don't expect people to know how to say my last name or remember it. So usually just Dr. Abbie is perfectly fine.
Okay, cool. Dr. Abbie, if you can leave us with one last thought, what would it be?
It's okay to be flawed. Being flawed just means that you're human. We aim so hard to be perfect that we try and change ourselves to an unrecognizable degree.
Mhm.
It's okay to be flawed, and it's good to be flawed.
All right. I love it. Last comment from Charles. He says, Dr. Abbie and Alan, I'm constantly amazed by the wisdom that you young people have and share. At 70, I'm humbly shaken at how long it has taken me. Well, I'm pretty sure I'm somewhere in between the two of you. But it is interesting how different generationally these
Yeah.
discussions evolve, and I do really appreciate the work that you've done. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and to find out more about Dr. Abbie Maronio, go to her website, abbieMaronio.com. That's ABBIEMARONO. And her recent work in progress, The Road to Empowerment, The Journey Through Shame. And thank you all for being with us today. Normally we do this at night, but thank you for everyone who did jump in and follow us and share your thoughts and comments. I really, really always appreciate your feedback. If you enjoy this podcast and the Coffee and UFOs podcast, you can find both rebroadcast on the UnX network every Thursday evening. To find out more about this program and upcoming events, program schedules, you can follow me on, I just opened up an account on Blue Sky. So that's at Mystic Lounge on Blue Sky. And I think that's probably where I'll be doing most of the updates now. I just really don't spend that much time on X. It's too toxic. All right. So peace and love, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you on the flip side.